I know things you never see. You never see someone taking a shit while running at full speed.
Come on, kid, get rid of some of them turds in the shit box.
Welcome to the Bathroom Break Podcast with me, Rab himself. Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Rab from the Bathroom Break Podcast. Just wanted to take a minute to thank you all for listening to the podcast. It's been a lot of fun to sit down with some really interesting people and shoot the shit, talk all that poop and stuff. But we want to try and make this thing better for you, so we're going to need to raise some funds. If you head over to greengate.bigcartel.com, there's a donation link there. If you feel so inclined to donate to the Bathroom Break Podcast, awesome. If not, sit back and listen. We're going to talk some crap. Welcome to the Bathroom Break Podcast. I'm your host, Rab himself, and I'm sitting here today with musician Jim Fairchild. You're in multiple bands, Grandaddy first and foremost, and All Smiles, which is incredible, and honestly one of my all-time favorite bands, MODESTMOUSE. So, man, welcome to.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Welcome to the plaza, the courtyard.
Yeah, dude, we're sitting at Dangerbird Records right now. And this place is rad, So how did you get involved with Dangerbird?
Well, I've been involved with Dangerbird sort of, I guess, on and off, basically since they started when it was around 2005 when Grandaddy was kind of the first version of Grandaddy, or the first movement of Grandaddy was starting to die down. I was living down here and I had left Modesto a couple years before, I guess. And then I wound up, my friend Peter actually started the label, and he still runs it. And my friend Aaron, who works at the label now, Aaron Espinoza, Aaron and I wound up producing a record for Peter, a Peter Walker record. And then Peter and I produced a record for a band called Dappled Cities, this incredible band from Australia.
Oh,
and
nice.
Then All Smiles, which was like my project, wound up getting signed to Dangerbird.
Yeah.
And so the first record that I did was on Dangerbird, and then just through a bunch of stuff we wound up not working together in the future. But I always stayed really close friends with Peter, Peter and I always at least stayed in regular contact, and I always have really dug hanging out with him. And then now being back here, it was the conversation came up, with, I don't know, me being a music fan and just working with tons of different people and collaborating with tons of different people. They asked if I would come on and, do a little bit of A&R.
Oh, that's rad.
Start bringing bands to them. So there's a single series on Dangerbird called Microdose. And now I'm starting to bring in the bands for the Microdose series.
Damn.
So...
Yeah, and that's cool, and that makes sense from the band, that you had kind of you found that band from Australia, or?
Well, I didn't find them, but oddly they had actually opened a Grandaddy show before in Australia years before.
Yeah.
They wound up working with Dangerbird, but I've never. Everybody's trajectory is different, obviously, but I think a lot of times musicians or anybody, maybe you're an actor and at first you're super into the craft and you want to discover all how people do it, who the new actors are, who the new directors are, whatever, editors, whatever you're into. And then later, just as life transforms and takes over, I think a lot of times people sort of drift away from that passion.
Oh, yeah.
And it definitely ebbs and flows a little bit, but I've just never gotten away from being that 13-year-old kid going to, all the Grandaddy dudes are from Modesto. So you'd have to go to San Francisco or maybe Stockton Tower Records or Sacramento Tower Records, or there was the Beat up there. Anyway, you'd have to go somewhere to look for zines or demo tapes from the bands that you were reading about or whatever. Yeah. That energy it's never disappeared. I still, if I'm on Instagram, which is not that much, but I'll kind of let me turn my phone off. I'll kind of bounce around, and if I see somebody tagged, then I'll go and look at that and look at that and look at how all that stuff tumbles, and then I'll just wind up discovering stuff that maybe isn't even on Spotify or iTunes yet. I've just always been that dude. I'm just curious about new music.
Yeah.
And so through that process, I just, I'm just fascinated by how people do it and what stuff is happening, new and old. I just want to discover. But I think even more now in my life, actually, because I think there's that danger too as you become like an older musician, that you're just gonna. Maybe I'm not relevant anymore. I don't know. I can't answer that question. But the one very surefire way to not be relevant anymore would be to like stop being curious about what is happening out there. And so it's partly deliberate, but it's also just partly the way that I do it. I just am always finding new stuff. So it slots in pretty easily for, record labels want to find new bands, and, I can help people make records, and I can help people get their shit off the ground, and that's the best thing in the world, especially as kind of an older dude who's been through at least a generation of this, stepping back from it and realizing like that I know a lot about making records and master side and publishing side and making videos and all that sort of stuff. And that's another great thing as well, is to maybe be able to pass along some of that information in an official way.
Yeah, that's awesome. And to answer that, you're definitely still relevant, dude. I mean, like your music, every bit of it, Grandaddy and All Smiles and Modest Mouse, to me is all like timeless sound.
Oh, cool.
So like
Thanks.
Thinking back to like late 90s, early 2000s with Grandaddy and all of that, like that right now when you press play on it feels relevant right here and now. 20 years later, I feel like.
That's really good to hear. Yeah, I mean, I know that we used to talk about that a lot, is that you never, it'd be nice to think that if whatever you're making wouldn't immediately indicate when it was made.
Yeah. And not to like rip on hair metal or something like that, but there's bands like that where you're like, that is definitely like
1987.
Yeah,
Totally. Yeah. And some of that stuff is great also, but
it is, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, shit, I love, Duran Duran had like the most bulletproof series of singles ever. Like, but that shit was made in 83, 84. Like, exactly when that stuff happened, just because like that's that delay, that's that gated reverb, whatever. Those things are all time stamped, and there's definitely some of that in Grandaddy, and but the objective was to not have that be so obvious.
Yeah, that's cool, man. So I wanted to ask, like, you spoke a little bit about like when you were 13 up in Modesto. Like, when did you get your first guitar, and when did you like start playing yourself? Like,
well, my brother is 7 years older than me, and he was always into music, and he had a guitar around. I would always mess around with that. From I think I was probably like 5 or something when he had a guitar. I wasn't playing then really. But I started playing saxophone when I was in like 3rd grade. I was always super, super interested in music. Like, I remember this moment really, really clearly for my brother's, I think, 12th birthday. So he's 7.5 years older than me, so I would have been 4 at the time. There was this touring like Beatles review called Beatlemania. And so my brother wanted tickets to Beatlemania. This was well after the Beatles existed. This would have been like 1979 or something like that.
Yeah.
My brother wanted to go see it, so my parents got all of us tickets for it, and we went to the Orpheum Theater in San Francisco, and they just basically like, they get up there. I don't remember exactly, but I think they just play a bunch of Beatles jams, and then they would wear the costumes from that. So it's like, if they're doing Sgt. Pepper's, then they put on those costumes, and then like, if they're doing something off of Let It Be, then they put on mustaches and like longer hair or whatever. And so I can totally remember within a couple of days after going to see Beatlemania, being this little tiny rugrat, and going over to my aunt and uncle's house, and looking up my aunt. I can totally picture this still going, there's this great band called the Beatles, and they have this great song called Let It Be. And she's like, yeah, cute. Yeah. And, so that was the first record that I bought. I remember that I wanted to have the record that Let It Be. For some reason, my parents didn't have that record. I still own this copy. But my dad made me, I'm sure I don't even think I was old enough to mow the lawn, but he made me like participate in lawn mowing somehow. Yeah. And like earn the money to go to this department store in Modesto called Ardan's. And then I bought it with my own money. I remember like going up to the counter and giving them like $5. It was like $4.50 or something.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And That's still one of my favorite jams. Let It Be. But I don't know. I was always super, super into music. And then I was probably about, I don't know, 12 or 13, and I was really into Iron Maiden. And I wanted, I thought Steve Harris, well, he is a super badass dude. He writes all that stuff. But I was really fascinated with the way that he played bass, the triplets, and like the kind of the galloping sound of like the Trooper or Run to the Hills or whatever, the way that he does those triplets, which is interesting because like that's so much of modern hip hop is a similar pattern in the hi-hats. But anyway, I got a bass when I was probably 13 or 14, and I remember my dad saying like, I wanted this better amp. I got this Gorilla amp and an Epiphone bass, and he's like, if you play, I don't remember what the duration was, but like if you play it for a year, then I'll buy you the better amp.
Yeah, it's motivation.
Yeah, so I did, and then I just started playing in bands around Modesto, and then I did that for a long time, and then we started recording some of my first bands. My first band would record. I think Deftones actually did some of their first stuff there too, at Enharmonic Studios in Sacramento, and there was a ramp there. There was a really gnarly half pipe, and then there was a quarter pipe up against the wall, and there was a bank wrap, and there was a stage where you would play. So we'd go up there and we would skate and make our demos and stuff. Started producing stuff for other bands when I was like probably pretty young, 18 or whatever. I got a 4-track, and then I was in a band around town when Grandaddy was starting, because they started as a 3-piece. And then it was sort of talked about as they wanted to expand whether I would be interested in doing that or not, but I was really loyal to my friends that I was in a band with, so I didn't want to do that. And then I just wound up joining Grandaddy a few years afterward, and that's, music has been my job, I guess, since like 1996, I think.
Yeah.
When Grandaddy got...
What was the other band that you were in before?
Well, it was called two things. It was called Power Trip, and then we changed it to Suffer Bus.
Okay.
Named after a Masters of Reality song.
Yeah.
Masters of Reality is that band that actually Caius and Josh Homme's project sort of came out of that scene, the like desert scene.
Yeah.
But Chris Goss, who I think I know he played on early Queens of the Stone Age records, and maybe he probably had something to do with Caius too, but anyway, his band, we named our band after. We thought that was a good name, Suffer Bus.
Nice.
It's not a very good band name, actually. But.
So, what the style of music was similar to Caius or stuff like that, or was it?
No, it was probably more. How would I describe that stuff? That band had like everybody was kind of into different stuff, so it almost kind of would have been more like Mr. Bungle or something, because there's like metal heads, and then there's like funk people and song people, and
hell yeah,
like all of that shit was sort of like getting gobbled up, and then on the side, like the dudes in that band and then some of the dudes in Grandaddy, we started a little like country cover band. Probably like I don't remember when that was, probably like 94 or 95. We would just, Robbie, who was Jason from Grandaddy and Tim from Grandaddy's really old friend, he managed Grandaddy until I think 1998, so like got us our first deals and stuff. Anyway, Robbie had this house that Jason set up a studio in the back. They both lived there. Tim lived there too. And then we would just go over there like probably once every couple of weeks, I feel like, and we would just learn all these country songs like George Jones, Lefty Frizzell. There's probably some Johnny Cash in there. I don't know. Like I can't remember how it worked. Maybe there were probably like 8 or 9 of us playing. We all got to choose 3 songs. Yeah. And then everybody had to learn all the chords. And
did you ever record any of that or?
No, not certainly not in any official way. I mean, Jason was often recording stuff, so who knows? There could be some archival shit somewhere of that stuff, but we would just. It was, we didn't need an excuse to sit around and get drunk, but it was. We could sit around and do that in more of an official capacity,
Yeah, and feel like you're being productive while you're.
Yeah, totally.
That's cool, and so like I'm kind of hearing that basically like all genres of music, or you're into all of it, and it sounds like going from Iron Maiden to George Jones to this, like it sounds like even like at an earlier age you were aware of so many different genres.
Yeah, like all kids nowadays, just because Spotify or whatever streaming services, they like, there's not really like, I mean, there are like metalheads or there's like skate kids or whatever, but
Yeah.
a lot of times, it's not out of the question that a kid's like, have you heard the new Katy Perry jam? And then they like Deicide as well, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
it's all mixed up, and that's always the way. Like, I was super into. I mean, I remember like a lot of my friends who I'm still friends with, all these dudes, but in my like metal or like punk community, they would be like, I mean, I'm not even gonna say the words, but they would be like say some pretty disparaging shit because I was super into REM and U2,
Yeah.
like, and Violence and Excel,
Yeah.
and Death Angel and Forbidden. I don't know. To me, it was just like it was always like a good jam is a good jam.
Right.
I loved Run DMC. I loved Beastie Boys. I loved Public Enemy. Like, I don't know, man. I've always been super into music, and that is. It's exactly the same now. Like, you hear a song like, I don't know. It's not even remarkable at this point, but like a song like North by Vince Staples I can tell what the differences are, and like I completely can dismantle chord sequences and melody and all that shit. But a song like North has exactly as much validity to me as like Happiness by Elliott Smith, you know what I mean? Like a chordally complex, melodically complex song is not any richer in experience or delivery than like a Vince Staples jam, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just, that's the way that I don't know, it's just the way that I've always listened to music. I would like I saw U2, like on the Joshua Tree tour. And then shortly after that, I was at a Violence show in Sacramento at a place called Danceteria, like, I don't know. It was just all the same shit to me. Not the same, but you know what I'm saying. I just never, those divisions. And that was I remember thinking that, like, as a skater kid, I mean, you probably grew up skating.
Yeah.
Like, there was that thing where some skater kids, not all of them, but they'd be like, they would adopt as much of a uniform as like a football player. So then it's like,
Oh, yeah.
if like, no, you can't like that.
You couldn't
like,
wear Janko jeans because that's what rollerbladers wore, so you had to wear
Right.
drawers or something.
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And there's like all those divisions, and I would always think, and sometimes I would say it like, well, this is how we wound up skating, because back then there were like 5 skaters in the country. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So like, wait, this is why we do this, so you can just do whatever you want.
Right.
You can't tell people that
make
they
rules,
can't, like,
yeah.
That's what skateboarding is. You can just do whatever you want.
Yeah, just being creative and having that freedom to express yourself like artistically in any direction.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's what's so rad about skateboarding, I feel like, because it's an art and a sport kind of put together.
Exactly, yeah. And that's, I mean, people like clown on Nyjah or whatever versus like, well, they're not piss drunks anymore because they're all sober, but like versus like the Baker type of skating or whatever. And I'm just like, who cares if Nyjah's wearing short shorts and is like kind of a jock? Whatever.
It's like, that's him. Just let him be him. Yeah, like now he's got to conform to that when the whole point was to not conform.
Totally, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
No, I get that for sure. You kind of brought up a good subject earlier, and I was thinking about it with when, I'm a little younger than you, but not much. And I have a brother your age, and so I was thinking, like, back then, discovering music compared to now. You're talking about Spotify, and Spotify is like, okay, I'll click here and I'll find this type, and then I'll click there and I'll find that type. Where back in the day, you had to go to different record stores and like different things and search all over to find new stuff.
Yeah.
And like, I wanted to just hear about kind of your process of doing that. Like, if you had like a specific record store or a few that you knew, like, they might have a little bit more like B-sides type of stuff compared to.
Yeah, well, I remember we would have to go to, like, there were the towers in Sacramento and Stockton, which were closer to us. It was easier to get to those. I guess it's about as far as Berkeley, but I mean, we would, before I had a license, like, I would tell my friends, like, there's these dudes, Jamie Durr, who's now an engineer. He just actually produced and recorded the new Sammy Hagar record.
Oh, what?
And I was in a band with him. But anyway,
yeah.
He's older than me. And then my friend Sean Wood, who's also became an engineer. I guess there's a lot of music stuff. Anyway, those dudes, I had a paper route. and I just spent all that money on music. So I would tell those dudes, if you drive me up there, I'll pay for gas and I'll buy you a record. So we'd go to Rasputin in Rasputin was where you could get like maybe the like the Creeping Death picture disc or whatever. You couldn't get that stuff at Tower, but you could get tons of stuff at Tower in Sacramento or Stockton that you couldn't get in Modesto.
Yeah.
But I remember like filling out special order forms, like you would read about. You'd get these catalogs. I can't remember what they were called. Maybe like it wasn't Music for the Masses. That's a Depeche Mode record. There was some catalog that you could order, and then you all these listings of imports, and then you'd like, oh, I want Metallica Jump in the Fire picture disc.
Yeah.
And then you'd go down to like if you couldn't get to Rasputin or whatever in Berkeley, then you go down to the warehouse in Modesto. Maybe it's still the Record Factory at that point. Fill out a special order form. They would take like half your money, $10 or whatever. And they're like, it might take 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So crazy.
Hopefully it'll show up.
Totally.
Yeah.
But then we were always going to shows. Like all of the. We were totally like part of the thrash, Bay Area thrash scene. So like we saw, well, Primus was not thrash, but they were on the periphery of that scene. But we saw Primus probably like
hell yeah
50 times between like 1988 and
so good, dude.
like 91 or something, and then Violence, Death Angel, Forbidden, Testament. There was a band called Horde of Torment.
It's funny that because there's such a Primus is such a like collaboration of all different styles, but it's funny to hear it that they were on the periphery of that 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 genre of music.
And they were the somehow they bridged the gap, because there was like always a darkness to their music in a way. So like the metal kids could show up at Primus shows and it wasn't beyond the pale,
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah. And my brother was a big Primus fan, and he's who turned me onto them.
Okay, yeah.
And then I went and saw him. I saw Claypool. I saw Primus, then I saw Claypool on his own thing, and then he was doing a band called Oysterhead at one point with Stuart Copeland.
Yeah, dude.
And I saw them, and then kind of got to meet them after the show or whatever, and that was cool. And but yeah, no, that's cool. It's cool to hear that, just that whole. Like thinking back to those days of innocence, kind of when you're finding music and you're just finding, you're like, I'll give you $5 to drive me over here, and
totally.
God, those days were so rad, and hopefully kids are experiencing that kind of feeling now, and I think they probably are similar, but
Man, we went to a show. So the first band that I signed to that I found for Danger Bird that signed to a singles deal is a band called Millie. Actually, Brendan from the band's gonna come over here in a little bit, but we went to their show at El Cid last week, and I was so stoked when I left there, because it was like, I'm sure that me and a couple of people from the label, and my friend Sean, who was with us, I'm sure that we were the only people there, not only over like 20, like over 30, but like over 25.
Yeah.
There were just all these younger people, so stoked, like singing along, and everything was like shit that is so off the radar of, not even like over underground music. It's just like that stuff is not, no one's heard about it yet, but still there's like 150 people there who are super into it. And Sean and I were talking on the way back to our house. It's just like, oh man, it's still there. Like, it's still happening. Kids are still doing it.
Yeah, that's so cool, because I feel like that energy is like unmatched, where like that feeling you get from being like, just being in that group where everybody is feeling this thing and like aware, just have discovered this thing in a sense, and like just that energy of it. For a long time, I went and toured around with the band CKY. Because I done all the CKY videos and all those other things, and I went with them, and so I'd come out and like get the crowd chanting for CKY to that they were coming out, and then you jump off a balcony or whatever. But like the energy that was going on in those shows was just some of the best times of my life, of just feeling that. And just like there'd be times where Darren or Jess would be like, oh, like hang back here. I'm like, nah, I want to get out and into the crowd and be in the middle of that, because that feeling of
that energy, there's nothing like that.
And it's so cool, and it is like it's kind of neat to know, like you've been doing this for a long time, but just that you can still find that and still have that passion for that at this point, you know, like you said, sometimes you can lose that, whatever your craft may be, you can lose that energy for it, but I think it's important to like re-energize yourself by going to those shows.
Totally.
And doing that.
Yeah, and just, you know, also for me it's become really, really important to like collaborate, or, you know, at least make the attempt at collaboration with younger people too, because I mean, it's such an incredible gift to be in Modest Mouse or being Grandaddy for sure. But, you know, I don't know what to expect, certainly in Modest Mouse, because it's such a fucking weird band, and in the best possible way. It's totally unpredictable, but like I know those personalities, you know, and so, but they also routinely surprise me. But it's been really fun to be back in Los Angeles. I mean, that's one of the main reasons that we moved back here from New York. We were there for a couple of years. We were all over the country for a couple of years, me and my wife Natasha. But to be back here, because there's so much music that happens here.
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot of ability for me to connect with, you know, oftentimes younger people, and just like everybody makes music in a different way. So there's always a way to learn, you know, even with people who are way less experienced than I am, there's always a way to learn something new. And I really value that as well.
Yeah, that's cool. And like we were talking a little bit before this, just about how everybody's story is different, and like
Totally.
So they just bring a different vibe and a different element to whatever it is maybe you're doing. And I've learned that through collaborating in like filmmaking and other things. It's like, oh, I was thinking this direction, and then this person came in with this other idea, and you're like, damn, that just brings a whole new light on what it is. And I mean, it's fun to experience that. And I think like old or young or whatever really doesn't matter. It's almost just the difference in personalities. Totally. and who people are. But I wanted to hear a little bit of kind of just the journey of Grandaddy. Like, you know, you're saying back in 95, 96, and then in 98 or 97 or 98 is when you're getting signed. Like, what was that like being a musician that is playing in bands, you know, in clubs and doing that, and you're traveling around and you're on that scene, and then like all of a sudden you get signed? Because I feel like back in the day, getting signed was like where you're like, oh, like we're like, it's just that feeling of like, oh, like we're headed somewhere now, you know. Like, what was that like?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things in there. So, you know, like definitely at that time, I mean, there's still, well, now they're back, like big crazy deals. We didn't have a crazy deal, but getting signed meant, you know, that you got a little cash for sure.
Yeah.
Which isn't always the case now. So for us, you know, trying to think about the steps, like Jason was determined. He'd always recorded all the music on his own. He was really determined for that to continue. So like we took, you know, the majority of it, and we're able to bolster the studio. You know, people weren't really recording themselves back then. Now it's much easier to do that, because every laptop comes with basically a professional recording studio. But that was a really big deal. I'll just tell you the memories of, like, so Grandaddy, we got a little tiny deal with this band, or this label called Will Records, and then we got a little dough from them, and then Richard Branson had just started a new label called V2 after he had gotten out of Virgin a few years before. So V2 signed us outside of the U.S., and so we rented this house up in the hills in Coulterville, which is like 60 miles east of Modesto. And it was a 4-bedroom house, and it had a two-story house, and it was on 50 acres, and it was $500 a month. And
that would be nice to be able to get that now.
So crazy. You probably still could up there.
Yeah.
And then V2, without them knowing it, they bought us a lot of half pipes. We would always like bury that in the budget somehow, like say we were buying a compressor or whatever, and then build a little mini ramp.
Yeah, hell yeah.
So we built a fucking wild, I mean, I think about this ramp a lot. This really, it went downhill because we didn't really level it. We didn't level it properly. So it was narrow. It was only 8 feet wide, and it was like, it had really fast transitions and tons of flat bottom, but then you'd go like downhill, and it probably dropped, I bet it dropped like 6 inches. So you'd have tons of speed like going toward the north wall,
Yeah, dude.
And then you basically have to push going back up the south to the south wall. But
it's so funny because that's like explaining like the exact ramp that we had built in my friend's backyard was like that. We all just got a little bit of money together, and then you like take some wood from like a house that's being built over there, and then put this thing together, and like we built it, and then we're like, oh, we didn't even think about coping, so then we had to like cut out and then try to get coping in there, and it was just so ghetto. But we were up there with like, you know, like work lights. Skating, because the first night that we finally got it all done, we had like work lights up there, and we were just like out there skating, and it was like so hell, because it was like you like the one side you hit, it was like the transition was just like oh, and then like the next one was like oh, this is nice over here, I can try.
Yeah, like, exactly.
Oh, and then like, you know, so it's just funny, that reminded me of that
ramp. Also, all you East Coast dudes, I mean, East Coast skating is so much different, because like Donnie Barley and Brian Anderson, those dudes, like Kim Cardona, you know, Keith Huffman, all those, you gotta. Like the surface sucks out there because like and you also can't skate, so that was just such a different style of skating. You guys were like kind of tougher than West Coast skaters in a way. But anyway, we got signed, and we made the first record out at that place, and it was so surreal that I kind of, there wasn't really even the ability to process it, because like we got done with that record. Like we had made an EP and we had gone on tour. So this EP came out in 1996 and it only came out in the US. It came out in April of 1996. And then we did a tour that summer. We were only on Will Records. We didn't have an international deal. And with no exaggeration, we did a 5-week tour. And I bet that entire tour, we probably played in front of a total of like 100, maybe 150 people.
Oh.
It was gnarly. I mean, there were and there were.
It's like, you here for the show? Like, nah, I work here.
No. Kirby's Beer Store in Wichita, Kansas. That actually happened. Yeah. My first name is Kirby, so it's funny that we played there. But they the Butthole Surfers were playing down the street with maybe Stone Temple Pilots.
Wow.
And I remember that we played for the bartender. That was fucking it. We played for the bartender. He's like, I'm gonna give you $50 or whatever it was. And so and then but we heard this probably 5 times on that tour, like, this never happened before. We've never had no one here. And so
that makes you feel good. Ego is inflated.
In a lot of ways, that was probably good for us, because when Jason booked that whole tour on his own through Maximum Rock and Roll's Book Your Own Fucking Life publication, he would just call people. Whatever. Anyway, so we did that, and so I think we had no expectations. And we got signed to V2 outside of the U.S., made that first record at the place in Coulterville. And I mean, we knew that a few people out there liked us. Yeah. Like, I don't want, it sounds maybe a little egotistical to say important people, but kind of a few important people liked us. But what does that mean? Doesn't mean anything, because like nobody comes to shows or whatever. Yeah. And all of our friends in Modesto liked us. And then we got done with the record like in July of 1997. Me and Jason came down here, we mastered it, and they started putting singles out like in September of that year. Maybe they started servicing radio even like a month later. And then Jason was the only dude with a passport, because he had to go to London to sign the deal. And then there was just this sudden emergency, like, you all have to get passports because it's starting to like pop off in the UK. So none of us, I mean, we had been on that tour and we had like gone on skate trips and stuff, but we had never really traveled before. And then suddenly we all had to go out and get passports. And then we were just 2 months after that record came out, we were in London. We went to London. We went to Belgium. We went up to Edinburgh. But anyway, that was the craziest trip, because everything just happened so fast. Like, the record had been done for like 2 months. We played 3 shows in London over the course of like 3 weeks. The first one, there was basically like the staff of the label there. Yeah. So there were like 10 people and a couple of journalists. But then the right journalists were there, I guess. So then they wrote about it, like in a weekly or maybe a daily or whatever. And then there was a second show like a week later, and then it was like, wow, there's people here. Shit, this is cool. Like, there's 50 people here. That's the most we've ever played in front of. And then the next show, I don't remember which, maybe it was the Independent or something, but one of the like bigger, I think, dailies in the UK, or maybe NME or something, wrote about the single or one of the shows. And then we played at this bar that held like 150 people, and there was a fucking line down the block. Damn. And it was like, whoa, this is crazy. And then we had to come back a couple months later, and it was kind of happening again, like bigger and bigger. And then we just decided like nothing's happening in the U.S. because it was still Will Records and they didn't know what to do with us, and maybe people just didn't like us here. I don't know, but we went to Europe probably like 6 or 7 times on that first record on Under the Western Freeway, and then during that we wound up getting off of Will Records and signing to V2 worldwide. So then there was a little bit of actual money and expectations going into the second record, and this was a funny thing because we were all a little bit tripped out by the expectations, but Jason had the idea like, well, what we should do is we should make a fake record, and then when the real record is done, what's going to become the second record, we should send them the fake record, which we actually did. And it was just this.
What was like the reason kind of behind that? Just to get them off your back so you could make what you wanted?
Yeah, well, we made the fake record and then we made the real record, and I knew the real record was really good, and everybody did. I mean, Jason just made these incredible songs, but we still just went through with the plan. Like, let's just fuck with them a little bit. So we sent them this fake record, and then the way that it worked was that we FedExed it so that New York would get it at the same time as London, as Germany, as blah blah blah. And so then I think the way that it went down was like everybody in all the offices throughout the world, they all sat down at a point in time, and they like somebody pressed play somewhere and they're like listening to it on speakerphone, and they're listening to this fake record, and it was like, I mean, it's out there in the world. We wound up putting it out under a fake band name later called Arm of Roger, but then all these people are just sitting around going like, I mean, if you hear it, you'll just be like, what the fuck is this? And the first couple songs sort of make sense. It's sort of like,
you like drag them into it.
Maybe that's just not a very good new Grandaddy song. And then by the time you're like at the fourth song, you're like, what is this shit? And then
that's awesome.
It's just so stupid. It's just like dumb, juvenile, drunk humor. But
that's hilarious.
Yeah, and they didn't realize it for a while. And then our A&R person, who I'm still close to, her name's Kate Hyman. Her husband figured it out first. He's like, Kate, they're fucking with you. This is a joke. So then she called me. I was managing the band at the time. She called me like 5 days later, and I was petrified. And she's like, because I called Jason. I was like, dude, we got to call him and say, we're just kidding. He's like, no, dude, just let it play out.
Let that go for a while.
Yeah. And so it was 5 days later, and then Kate called me, and I was like, hey, what's going on, Kate? How are you? And she's like, I'm doing good. I was like, so did you get the record? And she's like, I got the record. Now send me the real record, you fucking asshole. And so that record became the Software Slum, or what, that's the one that, and that was kind of like the breakthrough. Like, it happened here, it happened in the UK, at least bigger than it ever had been before. So and that got really crazy. There was a lot to process, because it was like, we get word that David Bowie's a fan, for example. So then he starts coming to shows.
Wow.
And like showing up backstage, and I'll say as a side note, like, what an incredible dude. Like,
dude, that's insane.
Sweetest, like a true gentleman. Like, when you think about that dude and you're like, wow, he's a handsome dude who made Space Oddity, and he's cool, and he was all of that stuff. He was just like, at least in our limited like few times that we hung out with him, experience, was a nice dude. And then Elliott Smith took us on tour, and that was a big deal.
Wow.
So like all these things started to happen, and then it became like a thing, and then also with that then we just started getting just. I mean, I used to say this, and then unfortunately, Kevin passed away a couple of years ago, unrelated to this. But I used to just think like, I would say this to people, like, it's a fucking miracle that the 5 people in that band are still alive, because the lengths that we went to, not to kill ourselves, but that would naturally be the byproduct of just like our, abuse of ourselves. The fact that didn't happen was on mine. Like, I got fucking run over by a semi, and like, just drugs and booze and like precarious situations and like dumb stuff that I'm like bummed that we, like drinking and driving while we're still driving a van and stuff. Just like really, really bad stuff.
Yeah, I've never done anything like that.
Yeah.
So, but no, I mean, I can totally relate, because it was the same way, and I'd felt that way for a long time. Like, it's a miracle everybody's alive, and then Ryan died.
Right.
And then
Yeah, I'm sure.
So it's a similar kind of feeling of that. And I got sober like coming up on 10 years, but
Yeah, I'm a little over 3 now.
yeah, and so I had to do that because it was insane. Like when you think about the way that we were living, and it's very similar. I mean, like I was touring with the rock band CKY, and then also doing the Jackass and the Viva La Bam and all these other stuff that was just crazy and a crazy way to live. And and I mean, eventually it catches up with you in one way or another. It doesn't necessarily have to be like death or with that stuff, but it kind of caught up with me in regards to just my mental health and
those experiences have a lot of weight, and carrying that shit around with you gets heavy.
Yeah, so it's wild. So after like you kind of got, you guys got big and shit, you got David Bowie coming to your show. Like that's gotta like blow your mind that's happening, and I mean he's just an artist that's, I just feel like on another level than anybody.
I mean,
but like,
you get chills when you say that.
Yeah,
it's just like it's.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I think there's ways that you could like draw up a diagram to demonstrate that he's like the best to ever do it, or one of the 5 best to ever do it, or whatever,
Yeah, I mean, and I would second that argument, because it is like it's all levels of art with him, that like it's
Totally.
musician, but like
well,
every
he just
other
lived
aspect.
it, like he was so in it.
Yeah, and so that's so cool. And so like, it blows your mind to all of a sudden you're getting recognition in Europe, and then now it's starting to happen for you with the second album, and you're going to the US, and everything's getting big and doing that, like, and you say you live this life of excess and all those things. Like, did you guys kind of ended up taking a break at a point, I think, and
yeah, I mean we pushed through pretty hard. We came home from doing all the stuff with the software slump, and then Jason bought this house in Ceres, California, which is right next to Modesto. Made a 3rd record there. This record called Someday, and then that came out, and it just like Grandaddy was a really weird thing where either because of our bad decisions or mismanagement, like it's still a band that's maybe it sounds really arrogant to say this, but it's still really influential. Like I have so many younger people or whatever, just people who are like, that record meant everything to me. That happens often, fortunately. But it never quite got to the point where it was like we could all just like take a year off and, settle into whatever sort of reflective state would have been required to be able to continue. So we toured that record, and then Jason made another record after that, which was really like, I mean, it was starting to go more and more like Jason-centric as the band progressed, but then that one was basically like just a Jason solo record. This isn't Sour Grapes, just the way that it went down. And then we just had a meeting like, we can't go back out and do the same shit, and that's what it's going to be. It's just going to be the same stuff. So we made the decision to call it, and that was right around the time where I was like making a bunch of stuff on my own. I was determined to at least like, I'd always made songs, I'd always had fragments of stuff, but I was determined to like at least see that through, like who knows what this is going to turn into. But me and Natasha went to Portland for a summer, and it was right when I was working with Peter a lot, first starting to work with Peter a lot from Danger Bird. And so Peter and then my friend Solon Bixler both really encouraged me a lot. And Peter was just like, he would hear me playing like little fragments of stuff, and he's like, I love what you're doing, I want you to finish this. And then he really encouraged me to like see the record through, the first All Smiles record. And then that was also right when like I had met Isaac before, but we were living in Portland, and and Dan Gallucci had left Modest Mouse, and who had sort of been in and out of the band for a long. I mean, there was always the core 3-piece, but then Dan would come in and out, and he wrote Good News with Benji and Eric and Isaac, and then he left. So then Isaac and I kind of became friends through Joe Plummer, who's still a very close friend of mine, and played with Modest Mouse for a long time, and played with Shins, and now plays with Cold War
Plummer's
Kids.
in All Smiles, or
Yep.
Yeah.
And Joe's played with All Smiles a lot, and but he was playing with Modest Mouse at the time, and then had Isaac get in touch with me when Dan left the band. So then Isaac called me one time, and he's like, hey, we have these shows coming up. Do you want to play them with us? Dan left the band, and we'd never played together at all. He just liked Grandaddy.
Yeah,
So
nice.
I was like, sure, sounds great. And I was like, when are the shows? And he told me whatever the dates were, and then I was like, yeah, okay, cool. So when should we start practicing? And Isaac's just the most amazing dude, because I don't know what sort of fucking magic that guy's working with, but he's just one of those dudes who, like, stuff works out, you know? Like,
yeah.
It just, he has faith that it's going to work out. Where'd my dog go?
She's right under you.
Oh.
Right here.
And so it does. But anyway, I was like, so when are these shows? Okay, when should we practice? He's like, I'll get in touch with you. I was like, okay, cool. And then it was like, I mean, I don't think I'd be exaggerating to say it was like a week before the Modest Mouse shows were going to start. Or allegedly. I didn't know. Maybe it's not going to happen now.
Yeah,
so I had a few beers one night, and Natasha and I were talking, and she's like, well, you should call him and, like, see if this is going to go down.
Yeah.
And so it's probably, you know, I mean, I know he's a fellow rocker, so I can call him a little later than I would call, like, most people. It's probably like 10:30 or 11. He's like, hey, Jim, how's it going? I was like, hey, man, good. I just wanted to check in, like, about what we were talking about a couple weeks ago. I was like, why don't you come over? I was like, now? He said, yeah, come over now. So I went over to
That was
his
at
house.
night.
Yeah, like
Okay,
11 o'clock.
yeah.
I probably got to his house at like 11 o'clock at night. And it was Isaac and Eric and Tom. Eric's not in the band anymore. He was one of the original three. And he left us in 2011. Left the band. Tommy and then Jeremiah. And he was like, you know, yeah, I think the shows were about a week away. So we kind of like played a little bit, but we didn't play songs. And then we did that for the next several days. Like, he's like, come back tomorrow. So we would just sit around and drink, like starting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, just drink beer and like jam. And then finally, after 2 or 3 days of that, I was like, do you want me to do these shows next week? And he's like, oh yeah, totally. I was like, do you want to give me like a list of songs to learn? I don't know any of your music. I mean, I knew it, but like, I don't know how to play it.
Yeah, right.
And he's like, so Eric wrote down 15 songs, and then so we would just basically for the next like 4 days or whatever, I was like, okay, well, I got to go learn these songs. So I left, you know, drunk, went home and learned a few. And so I would go home drunk at the end of every practice and learn like 4 or 5 songs. And I didn't have any idea there's, you know, Isaac used to record a lot of guitar, well, still does, but record a lot of guitar parts. So I would like learn all the guitar parts.
Oh, man.
And then I would just like go.
Just in case I have to play this or
yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly. And then I would go back the next day, and then a few times I'd like start to play something. He's like, that's my part. I'm like, okay, shit, I don't know. Sorry. And then so
That's awesome.
we played, and then that was a whole, I won't even go into the specifics because it gets a little personal, but like, we played the first show at the Fillmore, which is like a private show, maybe for like Macromedia or somebody,
Yeah.
like Flash or some shit like that.
Okay.
And the show went really, really weird. And then the next night we were gonna play in Reno, and then some shit went down in San Francisco that made it so that we couldn't play the show in Reno. But then
Okay.
we had a night off the next day, and the venue was open. So then it was at the Hilton in Reno. So the show's just postponed. So there's just like thousands of Modest Mouse fans walking around in this casino, and we're all there like fucking playing blackjack or whatever, and then people are just walking up and they're like, what's going on? We're like,
Oh, man.
we're not playing until tomorrow. And so they're like, whatever. But that's just how stuff goes down in that world. And then we played that show, and then the next, so there were 3 shows on that first run, and then the third one was at Shoreline Amphitheater, which is like, you know, 22,000 people or whatever in Mountain View, California. And I just remember thinking, like, this is so fucking weird, like, because that was, Grandaddy had played festivals that big, but we had never played like arenas or like, you know, amphitheaters like that.
Yeah.
As like
Wow.
one of the main draws.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, like, you know, any of this sort of stuff that I mean, you've had, I know, a ton of experiences like this in when you're like, it's just so surreal, because like I was just thinking at that moment, like a week ago, I still barely know these dudes. And I was just like sitting in this dude's attic, like figuring out these songs, and now I'm in front of 22,000 people who are singing along to this.
Yeah.
And I also think that it's really important to keep your finger on that sort of stuff, because it is truly so surreal that there's no fucking way you could ever try to integrate that as like your new fixed reality. It's just trippy, you know, like, and that's why I think, you know, that shit screws people up. I'm sure it's screwed me up for sure. I'm not immune to it, but that shit really can mess with people's heads, like thinking that that's now just what your life is.
Absolutely.
And your life is not like being on TV or playing in front of 18 trillion
the
people.
Adrenaline and everything that comes out becomes this drug in itself.
Totally.
And then, like you said, if you start to think that's your new reality, like you're in trouble, because that's not going to always be there. And but it's hard not to like get kind of, you know, I would say like, you know, romanced by that.
Oh man,
you know,
absolutely.
You're kind of like, well, why can't this be, you know? And it's like, because it is like, you know, just kind of riding that wave when it's there, and then it shifts and changes, and man, that's gotta be wild though, to like feel like, man, I gotta learn all these songs real quick and do that, and then get out there. And
it got even weirder too, because at that time, they were, you know, coming off of Good News for People Who Love Bad News, and then they were just starting to think about writing the next record. And so Isaac's like, we love playing with you, but before I asked you to play these shows, I had asked Johnny Marr to come and write songs with us. And so then, and I won't go too deep into the weeds with this, there were a lot of iterations, but then it became this thing where I was like sort of jockeying for the new guitar player in Modest Mouse position with Johnny Marr, who's this dude who, you know, we'd all grown up knowing was this legendary dude from the Smiths and Pretenders and Talking Heads. It was like, again, like this is a very surreal moment in life. And Johnny wound up playing with them for a while, and then that didn't wound up that didn't
change,
become a forever thing. So then I have now been in the band for, you know, more than a decade.
And that's crazy. And so then you kind of over time like got into the writing process as well, right? I mean, I wrote some of the stuff on the last record, and I'm sure it'll be the case with the new record whenever we get that rolling. And you know, it's, I mean, that band is just it's I think I can say this sort of objectively, because I didn't start the band. I've only been there for a while, but when that band is at its best, it's one of the best bands in the world. Like that, it's just, that catalog is so deep, the songs that they have made. And you know, I definitely think that Isaac is like one of the best dudes to ever be a front man. Like, he's, the way that he sings, his lyrics, his performances, his guitar playing, like that band is all of those, the you know, the core of that band, like even though Eric isn't there anymore, like the way that those three dudes played together, it's just such a unique thing. Like nothing has ever sounded like that and will ever sound like that again. And you know, Isaac is weird because he's like such a, he totally has, like nothing happens without him, but he also is completely empowering, which is not the case with a lot of like bosses, you know, like bosses of bands. You don't feel like there's an influence there, but you don't it's not necessarily a line in the sand sort of thing. So
and he empowers people, like like you're good at coming up with riffs or whatever, so fucking come up with them. You know, like whatever. He's
that's awesome.
It's an interesting thing.
Because I feel that way about Modest Mouse. Is like, to me, it's a band that I could listen to in any mood, which is hard because, like, you know, like certain bands you're like, I'm just not in the mood for that right now, and then I'm like, I'll, you know, maybe I'll get to that place, and then on a certain day you're like, this is exactly what I want to hear right now. But with Modest Mouse, there's a feeling of like, whatever mood I'm in, there's songs or different albums, that things that like play to that.
Totally.
You know, and that's that is like pretty special and unique that there's one band that can do that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, their catalog is just, and I'll say, I mean, I'm a member of the band, but I'll say their catalog because the songs that they've made are just there's like ballads and there's country-ish songs and
Yeah.
there's funk songs, there's like metal songs.
Yeah.
And none of it sounds like we're gonna do our metal thing now. It's like
Yeah.
there's always it's just
Yeah.
there's such a unique energy. It's like it's its own ecosystem, you know.
And so how does that work, like, when you guys tour? You know, I mean, there's bands, like, out there that really, like Ween or something, like, actually we're in the
Yeah.
So they, like, I went to a show in New York and have seen them a couple times, and like sometimes they'll do things where they're like, okay, we have 3 shows here and we're not playing the same song twice throughout those 3 shows. So then it's like all of this crazy, and you're like, you don't know what's coming. Like, how does it work as far as with Modest Mouse? Like is it just like you figure out what the set list is when the show is there, or is there sort of like a
I make
a
the
plan
set list
going
every
through?
night. There's
Okay.
no, I mean, I give it to Isaac, and it's gotten to the point where mostly he's just like, yeah, great. If we're playing the same venue 2 nights in a row, I mean, basically the way that I do it is I have whoever our tour manager is, it's usually the same person, but I have our tour manager print up like the last 3 times that we were sort of in that region or
Okay.
even in that city.
Yeah.
And then if we were close by like the night before, then I'll have that one in front of me as well. So I'm thinking about a couple of things, like thinking about like how the venue sounds and feels, what the mood is of the band.
Yeah.
There's times where it's like people are feeling a little darker or
Yeah.
a little like brighter.
That's rad. So,
Try to
yeah.
represent that. Try to like how sound's gonna carry in the room or whether it's outside or something like that. I'll think about that stuff, and then, but like when we do 2 nights at a place, we have done 3. I wasn't making the set list when we did the Crystals several times in a row, but I just there's like 2 songs that'll probably appear pretty much every night.
Yeah.
But other than that, like the set lists are dramatically different
That's awesome.
every
Yeah.
single night, and you know, and then I also try to think about like just pacing and stuff, like, you know, get people amped up, and then but you can't always be
Slow it
amped
out,
up. You
yeah.
gotta like have it, you know, and then also well, whatever. Another part of it is like there's so many instruments up there that I don't want it to be where the show is just basically like people walking back and forth like trading instruments. I want there to be, you know,
Yeah,
some
yeah, yeah.
continuity, and like if we manage to get a little energy rolling, to be able to let that continue for a while. But I mean, you know, it's just such a rich catalog. I mean, I think we're choosing from like 75 songs or something
Wow.
at this moment.
Yeah.
So.
That's amazing. So, just thinking about, like, to shift gears a little and talk about All Smiles, because that to me is a band like that is rad. And I mean, that's your project, right? But you have like Plummer and other friends that are playing
Yeah.
on it as well.
Yeah.
And not that you're not. Are you kind of creating all parts for drums and for this? Or
No, not necessarily. I mean,
Okay.
It's been definitely not the drums. It kind of has varied from project to project, but it's like the first one was I basically played a lot of the stuff except for drums. I didn't play any of the drums. Joe played some drums. Danny from Phenomena, Janet Wise from Slater Kinney played a little bit.
Nice.
My friend Solon Bixler played some, and then the second one was a lot more of a collaboration in the sense that like I made all these songs. Solon helped me like kind of do the final shaping of them, and then we went out to Omaha to the Bright Eyes studio, to Mike Mogus and Connor's
Yeah.
studio, and so Nick Freitas, like he wrote his parts, and Solon wrote his parts, and Joe did as well. My friend Mike Creswell has engineered a bunch of that stuff. And then the third All Smiles record, I guess I played everything apart from the drums, and that was mostly Joe. And then now I've just gotten done with a bunch of demos that I don't know if it'll be an All Smiles thing or what I'm going to do with it. The thing that I've realized in the last few years is that I'm not that happy unless I'm making music, you know.
Yeah.
Or you know, working, like trying to figure out just ways forward. So I just got done with a bunch of demos that I'm going to give to Joe soon, and then figure out what those are supposed to be.
Yeah.
And then you know, there's a few interesting projects right now, but All Smiles, it's just it kind of started as like, I just wanted to be able to tell myself that I could do that, you know,
Right.
because I was never confident that like I could make songs.
Well, you definitely can.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm a big fan because I was just thinking like I write screenplay stuff too, and
Oh,
working
yeah.
towards becoming a director in that realm with films, and your band All Smiles is like a lot of that vibe and that feel really works for what I had been writing.
Oh,
and so I
rad.
was listening to a lot
Oh,
of it,
rad.
and it just is inspiring to be
Oh,
like,
cool.
and it feels like, oh man, yeah, okay, then, and like ideas just start pouring of what the scene looks like and kind of what I'm
Oh, wow.
creating with that because of the vibe of that
That's awesome.
music
Wow.
and how you feel that. So like, so
we should do some
thanks,
shit together.
thanks for that. Yeah. That's rad and really cool. And when you mentioned a little bit about just like making sure you're either making music or, you know, and I thought like, or being creative, and I wondered because, you know, you had mentioned your wife a few times, and she's an artist,
Mhm.
right? And so
Yep.
like, do you do art as well? Are you mainly musical, or is
I'd
there?
say, yeah, definitely mainly musical. I mean,
It might be intimidating if you have this awesome artist wife, then to
she's pretty encouraging. Like, if
Okay.
I mean, there's times where I'll sit down and draw or whatever, and she's like, "That's great, you should do that."
yeah.
We're actually working on a project together right now, and it's probably like maybe years away from being
Yeah.
ready, but it definitely incorporates both of our strengths, like, you know, music and her visual sensibility.
So does she have shows and stuff and like?
Yeah, well, she
and-
was
and
she was
gala-
on maternity leave because we have a 19-month-old son.
Oh, congrats on that. That's cool.
Thanks. Yeah, he's great. But when we moved back to LA, like, it took us a while to get a studio. We have a little storefront in Culver City that, like, I have a part of it as my writing room, and she has part of it for her practice. But she didn't make that much stuff for a couple of years because her stuff is like, it's really large scale, and then it also, she's using less chemicals now.
Okay.
But, you know, being a painter and shit, there's like
Right.
a lot of that
Gotta
sort
get
of
away
stuff.
from that while you're pregnant.
Yeah, I
and
didn't want to do that while she's
breastfeeding
pregnant or
and all that stuff.
breastfeeding and all that.
Yeah.
So, but the stuff that she's making right now is, she's had a ton of, you know, cool people by the studio who are really stoked on what she's doing. It's amazing. I mean, you
Yeah.
should come by sometime. It's like the
Yeah,
shit that
that's
she's
rad.
doing right now is really, really these crazy, like, large scale paintings.
Wow.
Um,
Dude, I love that. Like that kind of art to me is like when there's this huge canvas that it's
Yeah.
like, man, it's intense. And even if you see somebody like on a ladder and having to like get into crazy things to find it, and for me, like seeing that, like I'm trying to start to dabble in painting and that. I used to do a lot of pottery and stuff, and so
Yeah.
then like but to see that, like it's just amazing how the mind thinks, and you can like you almost break it down into sections of how you see the greater whole.
Right. Yeah.
And that's
yeah.
pretty neat to watch that process of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, those parallels. I mean, that's, I guess, the most interesting thing about art is like getting the parallels that exist between our existence and
Yeah.
the creation of that stuff, or the existence of that. But yeah, she's, you know, anything visual. Like, she's designed a lot of the furniture in our house. I mean, she can make ceramics. She doesn't concentrate on being a ceramics artist, but she's made tons of like ceramic stuff for our house.
Yeah.
And like designed. We have a big dining room with these huge ceilings, and she like designed the table and had it built. And
Yeah, that's
she's
cool.
getting ready to design we're gonna build a studio for her in our backyard.
Wow.
She's, you know, anything. She just has such a like definitive aesthetic.
Yeah.
She's incredible, you know. So
That's got to be rad to be like, all right, my house is going to be so awesome.
Oh, yeah,
because,
totally.
Yeah, she just, hooks it
it's
up.
funny too, because she'll be like, "Well, what do you think?" And I'm like, "What does it fucking matter what I think?
Yeah,
Like,
you do that.
You're so good at that."
Yeah. Whatever I think,
would be,
I
like,
think
15
that's
steps
awesome.
behind. Yeah.
Like, I
think
love
whatever
what you're
you do-
doing there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's really interesting to watch how like our little dude, which sides of our personalities he goes toward within that as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's neat. That's got to be really cool. And is that your first kid?
yeah, he's our first one.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool to watch that kind of
Oh yeah, it's incredible.
develop. Well, dude, thanks for coming on the Bathroom Break podcast.
Oh, man, thanks for having me.
Do you have any? You have some stuff coming up, like Modest Mouse is going to play in the fall or something?
Modest Mouse is doing a tour in the fall, and then I have an instrumental record that will come out on Dangerbird early next, like fully, like I basically scored an imaginary film.
Oh, hell yeah!
That I had in my head.
Damn, that's right. When's that coming?
I think it'll probably come early next year. There's a part of Dangerbird called the Arthur King Presents series where it's like, I don't think you could as narrowly define it as ambient music, but it's like generally instrumental music. And so they asked me if I would do one of those. And I've made tons of that kind of music, but I've never had it commercially released.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna call it Small Isles.
Oh yeah.
That's gonna come out probably early next year. And then interestingly, Jason is doing one for that series. From Grandaddy is doing one for that series as well, which will come out I think in August. But I want to. Maybe I should just say the goal, but I want to put out like an instrumental record as Small Isles. I'd like to do that like every 9 months or something. I'm just constantly making that kind of music. I love making instrumental music.
That's so cool.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, dude, I'd love to check it out. That's rad.
We're just getting ready to master it, but the mixes are done. And
sweet. Hell yeah.
Yeah, and then Modest Mouse is hopefully we've kind of started maybe working on new music. I'm not totally sure, but definitely that tour is coming up, and there's probably some Grandaddy stuff that's percolating as well.
Cool. So those are just always busy.
Yeah, and then I don't know if it'll be a solo record, but I just got done with the demos for a new set of songs that I made.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Hell yeah. Well, looking forward to it, man. Yeah, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you guys for having me on, man.
Sweet.
I appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, brother.
Thank you.
Yeah, rad.
No, undetected.